Let's go ahead and wrap up conversation. I'll give you another minute. So I hope you've had a chance to engage with at least a couple of these questions, maybe not all of them, but I'd love to hear what you've been talking about. And I'd like to go through each of these questions actually to see what your thoughts are about them. If you didn't address all of them, that's great, or any of them, but I'll start with the first one. In what ways do or would your vision, mission, purpose statements lay the foundation for a planning process? Do they currently? Could they? Would they? What did you talk about in that regard? Or not, if you didn't talk about that, you can be honest.
So part of our statement is widening our love, and we were discussing some of the logistics of we keep having people move on to glory or move on to other places that have been historically doing those intentional caring ministries, and making sure those ministries don't fall away just because someone has died or moved away. And how to keep that working, because there's still desire to have those ministries, but keeping training and resources moving to the next person.
That's important. Yeah. So it's still part of your core mission. So sustaining that mission. That's hard when you get to a point where the resources may not be doing that. Right? That's hard. Especially if it's a tradition or a signature ministry of the church. That's something to discern. Yeah.
That is hard because, we're going through this affiliation.
Yes.
After all that finished, everything that people left, and they left their job,
Yep.
you want to call it that, and so now you got to find somebody else to replace that job, and that's hard to do. I wouldn't want to know how to do this, like he did back there. It's you can't learn in one day. You just can't.
Yeah.
It takes a while. So you got to find somebody who can do that. That wants to do it.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of empty jobs in our church right now that need to be filled. And how do you do it when you've got, like I said, an older, age-wise church that people can't do it all.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's at the point where you say, or ask the question, do we need all these jobs? And what purpose are these jobs serving? And how might we imagine something differently, perhaps, in terms of how we do this work? And that is partly the process of planning that I've outlined here. And it's partly looking beyond the boxes, right? To say, and you can use the process to say, what are the resources we have? What do we do now? But it's a reimagination of that. What if the structure needs to be reconfigured completely away from what it has been? What if we need new skills or knowledge in order to imagine something different too, away from those positions? There's a lot of big questions here. So it's more than just sort of what are the technical changes. And I was talking about this with you back there, about it's more than just the technical changes. What do we need to tweak here? What do we need to tweak there? It's adaptation. What new thing? What can we do in the world that requires some different ways of doing it and being? And I know that, the United Methodist Church is in a tough process right now, and that process will continue, and particularly for your district. It's been a difficult time. And the question is, do we continue doing the same things we've always done, just with fewer people, right? Or do we imagine something different? Do we imagine different ways of doing and being? And how can our statements help inform that, right? If your ministry is to care for the community, does it have to be in the same ways you've been doing it before, right? There's lots of different ways to do different things. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure this is on point, but our church is a very small church, and we went from the normal hierarchy of the church, and we have a single board of governance now. So the only committee we have is the finance committee, and everybody's that's on the board is on that. And if you have 5 committees and you need 2 or 3 people on each committee, that fills up the whole congregation. And they're going to so many meetings that they can't get anything done.
Yep.
Well, now we just have one single thing, and we only have 1 meeting a month unless something unusual happens, Oh, we do have an SPR committee, that's different. But I think it's helped us a lot better. We're not spending all of our time in committee meetings. We're trying to get things done in an efficient way.
Yeah.
So that's a new way to look at church.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah, if you don't want something to happen, create a committee or a task force. Yeah, and it's hard because they're designed to make us more efficient and effective, right? But they actually produce quite the opposite most of the time. I mean, I'm in academia. We create a committee for everything, and they're just awful. And I just, yeah. That's right. That's right. And there are committees, are helpful. They're designed to sort of create democratic processes, right? So everybody has a voice, but oftentimes they just don't. And they decrease communication within a church oftentimes. They silo things. They're necessary, but do they need to be permanent and static and forever, right? So those are the kinds of questions that are really important, I think, as the United Methodist Church as a whole restructures, or, all of these things are going to be taking place at all of these levels. The question should be, what is our purpose? How are we discerning our purpose? And how do we align our activities, including our boards? Activities is everything, right? Boards, bylaws, how do we organize ourselves to do the work of the church, to do what God is calling us to do, but how can we do it differently in this time and place? Yeah.
Don't be absent, because then you get volunteer to do something. I was called up for a meeting and I got volunteered.
Yes, and right. And we live in a culture of scarcity too. There's never enough time, there's never enough people to do the work that needs to be done. What if we lived in a culture of abundance? There's always enough time to do the right work. And that's what Adrienne Marie Brown says. I shared about that book last night. She says there is always enough time to do the right work. And when I'm pressed for time with all the competing things that I have going on, I say that to myself over and over and over again until I actually believe it. Because it's true. Like, it is actually true. Like, right, there's always enough time for the right work. Am I doing the right work? And that's the question. Yeah. Yeah. Pastor Chris.
Oh, yeah. Well, two things. One, the reason that all that you've taught us about the vision and mission and purpose statements, why that's important is because of what we're talking about in terms of this attrition. So, because it's really easy to use this planning process to plan how to maintain your system rather than further your mission. So if your planning process is to replace people in existing positions in your existing system, you're doing busy work.
Mm-hmm.
If your planning process is to take your mission and to figure out how to further your mission, so congregational care, for example, that's a mission of
Yep.
your church. Your planning process can't be to replace the system. It has to be to take the mission and say, how do we plan with inputs and resources and outcomes for the mission of caring for one another?
That's right.
Not how do we sustain this committee, this congregational care committee, right? That's the difference.
Yeah.
And it may look totally different once you plan around the mission rather than planning around maintenance.
That's right.
Those are two very different planning processes.
Yep. Yeah, thank you for that. As I was walking around the room, I was hearing words like more families and committees. Like, what committee what decides this and what committee decides that? And I just thought to myself, oh no. It's insidious, right? How do we get more people in the pews and how do we get more dollars in the bank, right? How do we sustain what already exists? Like, it's as basic as throwing those questions to the side, right? What is God calling us to do in this time and in this place? And the ways we are doing it probably, maybe, may not be the ways that are the best ways to do it, right? Right.
Rethink them like your youth. Rethink them, say goodbye to them, now change them.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I think of people filling a role, I think of cogs in a machine. If you want the machine of church to keep going the way it's going, sure, stick more people in where you need them to go, and then, things will keep going as they are. Is that the life and ministry of what Jesus calls us to do? That's something for you to discern. Right?
So are you suggesting we need to find a better balance, perhaps, between
Yeah.
ministry in the church, for example, Sunday mornings, which is my passion, but then we have to balance that with what we're doing in the community and what God has called us to reach out. We're gonna find a better balance. And then in the individual things, so it's a three-pronged, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And those need to be in better balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Better balance. And that's where the three circles I showed, the tension between connection with God, connection with others, and connection with the world, right? That's a natural tension, but figuring out how those align and what your strengths are and what you need to focus on in one of those areas more than in other areas might be really important. I think when there's crisis or division happening, and this is true of any organization, but it's true of churches. When there's crisis and there's conflict happening, people go inward. So it's about the church. Let's just keep doing church better. Let's focus on this. Let's focus on, so we become so inner focused in terms of like, how do we sustain what's existing now, the church, as it is now, that those other pieces begin to fall by the wayside. Sort of, what is God calling us to do? And it becomes about the anxiety of trying to sustain what's existing now, or trying to sustain the remnants of what's existing now. Even amidst all the disaffiliations, right? The question is, okay, how do we sustain what we have now, right? Is that the right question to ask, or is it the question to ask, what's God doing now amidst all of this, which is difficult, right? But what's God doing now, and what's our work in that? And it might mean some different things. And that's the hard thing about all of this, because all of this, whether you're thinking about vitality differently, beyond people in the pews and dollars in the bank, whether you're envisioning mission, purpose, and vision differently than it was before, and whether you're planning in a different way. Planning is just another word for intentionality. How are you being intentional? Intentionality doesn't mean you don't let the Spirit show up. That's the other piece of that. And in all of that is change. And change is so hard for people to deal with and to navigate. Change is hard. Change is hard for everybody because structures change, relationships change. So how do you manage with who you are, where you are now, small but mighty, right? Small but mighty. How do you move forward? And how do you be attentive to God's guidance? That goes way beyond filling roles. Because that kind of crisis makes us ask the question, why? Why are these things important? Why are we doing them? Maybe we need to do something different. Yeah.
I go around, we do fellowship, little coffee fellowship at church every Sunday. And we have a sign-up sheet, who's gonna do this Sunday, who's do that. So a couple of Sundays, or a couple months ago, we had nobody on our list. And I just, like I am, I stood up and said, okay, y'all, nobody signed up on this list, we're not having coffee fellowship next week. And it was like, what? I mean, it was like, I just threw bricks at these people and knocked them upside the head. They woke up. So now, and then you look at the list now, and I've got 3 months already filled up. It takes, and again, I can't do it all, but I can do that part by standing up and saying, hey, guys, if you're in a wheelchair and you can't do this, tell somebody that you'll buy the stuff. And somebody else will help you do this. We'll put your name on the list so I don't have an empty blank.
Yeah.
And
Well, and I had a pastor once, when nobody signed up to do coffee, did nothing. And nobody had coffee that Sunday.
oh yeah.
And that's a thing. So do we need to do it? And was it important enough that people did it or not? And so it's a question of the machine, right? And he intentionally didn't. He's like, I know this is happening. We're going to let it happen. And it was great because people then were like, well, what happened? Why didn't this happen? And so we had a conversation about why is this important for the life of the congregation? If it's important, do we do this? And why do we do this? And how do we do this with intentionality?
We were talking, and they said, all you gotta do is say, bring food, and people will get it.
Yeah.
People like together
Yeah.
around food.
But that's kind of the life of the congregation.
Yeah.
This kind of.
Right. And that's the balancing, right? Community, one another is the church, right? And so there are some churches, when I was doing the visioning process with this church, this UCC church in Denver, I had them write draft purpose and vision statements. We got into groups. We did this over several weeks. And one group wrote an ironic purpose and vision set of statements. They wrote an ironic one. And their ironic one reflected the truth, right? It's an ironic one. It was a jokey one. But they said, we exist as an elite social club to discuss things that we like talking about. But they knew that about themselves, to say we're a social club. I mean, there's a social justice aspect and they're very out in the community, but there's a whole other group of people who just want to be a social club, right? But they're honest about that. But it is balancing those tensions to say, yes, we're here for fellowship, we're here for one another, but how are we here in other ways? And how do we nurture our own spiritual life? So keeping those always in balance, I think, is really important. Yeah. And
Find out
yep.
who needs what. And where are these people going through? You know, where there's
Mhm.
several life is happening right now. And so when you sit there fellowshipping, you know, yeah, well, you know, I really miss my grandkids, or, you know, I've had a bad day and stuff like that, you know. I said, okay, well, you should have called somebody who could have prayed for you or such, you know.
Yeah.
Gotten there and had, or I had surgery done, you know.
Yep.
And without saying anything, and then, you know, we could make meals for you or something, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
But, so that's what we need our fellowship time for, is to
Yeah.
fellowship with each other.
Yes.
To become one.
And to be clear about that. Yeah.
And it takes a village, and the only way to do it is by saying something.
Yep. Yep.
Not only to God, but you have to say it to each other.
Yep. So let's go on to our second question. What elements of the planning process might work well in your context? What might not work as well or need altering? Yes.
We just switched over to a single government structure
Mm.
too. So we've had our very first meeting, and then we lost our pastor. Now we're having an interim pastor who was pastor before. And so, but we had an annual meeting sort of in the midst of all of this. And of course, all we did was kind of rehash the hash that had just been hashed that people didn't pay attention to about what we're doing. And, but what really strikes me is now with the single board, this yearly planning will be very important, because there'll be less people involved in all these committees, and they need to be a part of the church in decisions and what happens. And furthermore, the processes you're giving us would give us better direction, so we aren't just spending hours
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is what we tend to do when we used to have them about it once every 5 years. We have, oh, it's time to have a visioning meeting.
Yes. Yes. Well, and that's really that's great. And that's the goal of it. Focus and intentionality. It doesn't mean you're only listening to your own voices. It doesn't, but it's helping you, and it's helping bring to the surface things that your congregation is doing that are having an impact, right? You need to surface those things and be aware of them as a whole too. It's really important. Yeah. Other thoughts about the second question? Yes.
For me, I'm not really a part of local church leadership. And so as we're talking about all this, I'm like, oh, I have so many questions to ask. I have so many people I want to talk to in the congregation and see how they're feeling about things, because I don't even know where I would start until I know more about how everyone is approaching things.
Yeah. Well, and that's wonderful that that's your default, right? I mean, it speaks to a leadership. I mean, there's different kinds of leadership. There's some leaders who are just like, I'm just going to do this, and this is going to be great. Or these 3 people are going to go off and do this. But I think it takes a special kind of person to say, I need to hear the wisdom of other folks before we can figure out what to do together. And that's really what planning is, right? And not just folks in the congregation, but folks beyond that, right? That's looking at the needs. So yeah, that's absolutely. Yep.
And again, it would be, you know, what works and what doesn't work. If it doesn't work, then let's go on to something else.
Yeah.
We used to serve our colleagues all the time. We used to work with our colleagues all the time. And about 3 or 4 of the things we used to do with the colleagues are no longer there because it just didn't work out. We didn't have people to do it.
Yep.
You know, we've got a program now that may just dissolve because we don't have the people to do it, because of this disaffiliation thing that went through our church, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it really hurt us.
Yeah.
And so now we just go on.
Yeah.
You know, there's another door to open.
And things ending doesn't mean that they failed. And that's another thing in our culture that we don't embrace very well. Just because things end doesn't mean they failed. They just ended. They were what they were. They were successful. They were great for a time. And this is where planning really is iterative. You have to keep working at it. Things change, things end, cycles begin, cycles end. And that's really what our world is. I mean, like, we're always changing in our bodies, but nature is changing around us. The seasons show us that. All of these things mean that nothing lives forever except Jesus or God, right? Like nothing lives forever. And so, how do we let things go and honor that, what they were, and not treating the ending as a failure? It's an ending, and how do we move forward from that? We are human, so we like to assign value to things, but sometimes they don't need particular values assigned to them. Like ending isn't a bad thing, right? It can be good or bad. It can be both good and bad, right? There can be blessings, there can be challenges to both. Yeah. So the third question, what additional tools or resources might you need in order to engage in a planning process? Again, an intentional process. I would say what you've offered in terms of the district and the conference tools and resources would be invaluable, incredibly helpful for anyone who's wanting to do this kind of work in their church.
You need more than one lowly person from the church to come to one, get trained, get this thing figured out. If I go in there and say, okay, I learned this today, now we're gonna do it this way. No.
Yeah.
So you need buy-in.
Buy-in, they need a group to buy in,
That's right.
And understand the process. Because it's easy to not quite understand it and get off on the wrong track.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I would say yes and no. There are things that you need the leadership team of your church to buy into to do in this process. And there are things that just need to be done to show the leadership team of your church how it's done. And one, two, three people can do that. Can take on a project, see a need, go through the planning process of inputs, resources, outcomes, and just do it. And 6 months later, go to your leadership team and say, 6 months ago, we saw this need, me and my two friends here, and this is the process we went through to figure out how to accomplish this outcome, and we've accomplished this outcome, or we went through this process to accomplish this outcome, and we failed. And so now we still have a need that we want to meet, and we are coming to you to ask if you would like to be in on the next planning process to try to continue to try to meet that need.
Yep.
Because you either accomplish it or you learn.
That's right. There's no failure. There's always, never a failure, always a lesson.
So I'd say, if it's just you, don't give up and say, well, I just don't have people to help me with this. Figure out what is the small chunk that you and a friend or two of yours who are passionate about it can do. And show the church, show your congregation that it can be done. And then move from there. Sometimes that's the way these things happen.
Yeah. There's two different kinds of change, I think, that happen over time. And there's a gradient in between. But shocks are shocks to the system that can prompt a change. And there's slides, which are gradual over time changes, right? Both can do change. They just do change in a different way. Shocks will shock the system and shock change, right? So if you have a group of 3 people who do something, that can be a shock to a system, but it can produce really interesting change. The example that I shared about my student intern at this church, who was like, we are going to do this as a church. Like, this is what we're committing to. And she's changing the church, right? She's helping the church see what its capacities are in terms of what resources it has. Slides are the preferred way that we would all love change to happen, right? We convince a person, then they convince someone else, and over time we convince everybody. Those are more welcome changes. I don't know if they create the kinds of change that really are necessary in the world. Shocks are the ones that end up creating change. Shocks also have unintended consequences, though. There are splits, right? There are divisions. People might leave the church. Those kinds of things can happen. If our focus is butts in the pews and dollars in the bank, that's rough, right? But if our focus is on something else that we really believe we're called to do and be, there's going to be incredible transformation. And it's hard. These are not easy things, right? Change is not easy. Change is difficult, right? And what we're proposing here with mission and vision statements, understanding vitality different, these are change things. These are things that involve change. Planning, being intentional involves change. I want to bring us back to this definition of vitality. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God? Amidst all of the tools and plans and ways that we envision church to be in this time and place, it comes down to this, right? The structures that we have, the ways that we have of doing the business of church, right? The way we've businessed it, the way we've created certain structures, it really does come down to this. I have a whole bunch of slides on change that I'm going to share with you all. I'm not going to go through that, but I wanted to add them just so that you have them. But there's a lot, I have a whole thing on change and how change is hard, and lots of fun things about understanding change, lots of words. But I want to leave you with this little cartoon because I think it's very telling. They're interviewing a pastor, and he says, "We're hoping you'll lead us on a journey of transformation without requiring any real changes." Right? And I think this is how we think, right? Like, oh, we want to be changed, but like, don't mess up our committee system, or don't tell us that we should be doing anything different, right? But if we take vitality seriously, and if we take our call to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God seriously, these things are going to shift, and they're going to be uncomfortable. But I believe they're going to be exciting and produce fruit. So, blessings on all of your continued ministries, all the work that you're journeying, that you're doing. And my prayers are with you in this time for all of you. It's a time of difficulty, it's a time of drastic change. And my prayer is that you keep in mind Micah 6:8, and that you be attentive to where God is leading you and where the Spirit is leading you. So it's been a joy being with you, and blessings on your journey.
We cannot thank you enough for all your information you shared with us the last couple of days. Let's give Dr. Christina another round of applause. So thank you so much. Now, I can't wait to see what's going to happen in all of our churches. Visioning and new vitality and thoughts, conversations. We would love to hear those conversation pieces that you're having. Let the CRMs know, Major and I, let Chris know ways we can help you as you continue these conversations in your churches and dream big dreams and new visions. So as we are getting ready to leave, Chris, did you have anything to say? Okay. Yes. I have a couple announcements. I'm going to let Chris talk, and then we're going to do a couple announcements things. So.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this short and sweet. But we've spent so much time in the last several years dealing with COVID, dealing with disaffiliations. And I am so glad to be able to shift gears into this kind of vitality work now. I probably have 2 more years in this job, and that's what I want to spend my time on. So myself, your congregational resource ministers, these are the kind of gatherings we want to have at your church. So if you have 2-3 people in your church who want to have this conversation, let's have it, okay? Be in touch. Now, the moment I say that, everything is hectic for the next 2 months, and then I'm planning on taking some leave this summer. So I'm talking fall, right? Okay. I will have my normal fall routine that I'll be doing, but the meetings that I will be wanting to have with you are not going to be meetings around disaffiliation and all that I've been doing the last 2 years. It's going to be around this stuff. Okay. So as you get back to your church, talk to your leadership team, say, we want to get on Chris's calendar or on the CRM's calendar in September, October, November, okay? To have exactly these conversations. We can have our own little workshop at your church. Schedule a Saturday morning, a Saturday afternoon, a Sunday afternoon, weeknight. We can do stuff on Zoom. We can be in person. The whole thing is open. Okay, but we want to be sure and be having those conversations in your church to talk about your community, because we've learned there's no template that fits everybody. I can't send you a book and say, read this and follow the instructions and you're good. Every community is different. Every community is different. So we want to have those conversations. So take that back. Let's get on the calendar for the fall. Engage this stuff. Okay.
Okay. Kind of one big announcement before we leave is we have leftover barbecue from last night and a couple of wraps left over from lunch today that you guys need to take home with you. So there are bags downstairs, little baggies up of food. Pick one up, take it home with you, take it to somebody in your community that you know who could use it. Continue to spread that love of the food. So before we leave, when we were talking about leaving, I said, this is one of my favorite songs, The Trees of the Field, page 2279, that we needed to leave it as we're getting ready to go home, and we need to sing it with joy, okay? So we need so Cindy's going to help us lead it, and so 2279. Yes, stand. You got to stand for this one. That's clapping too. Yes, we shall go out with joy and be led forth. The mountains and the hills will break forth before you. There shouts of joy, the trees of the field will clap their hands. The trees of the field will clap their hands. So go forth with joy. Go into your communities, spreading the love of God. Thank you so much for coming here today and last night and being with us. So we look forward to seeing you all at annual conference end of June in Colorado Springs. And we'll represent the Trinity District with clapping, right, Chris?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we have to clap for Chris when he's announced, right? So thank you guys for coming. Oh, you good head home tonight?
No. So, yeah. Okay, well, that's what we got to do. We got to get your phone. So, if you can send an email to her and me, copy me, requesting a form, I'll make sure